So our next guest is Katerina Valentin, and she is the backbone behind a very big part of Access Consciousness. She has been working with Access for 12, 14, 15 years, something like that, and is very instrumental in the writing, creation, publishing of Access Consciousness books. So welcome to Books That Lead to Greatness, Katerina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's like 15 years now I've been
Is
using
it 15? Okay,
yeah,
so yeah.
it's a long time. Yeah, you are correct.
So today, Katerina is going to be talking to us about the magic of translation of the Access Consciousness books. We have Access Consciousness in sometimes up to 24 languages, which is very international. And we have amazing translators all over the world that do written translation, verbal translation, live replays, emails, books, endless amounts of translation. And it is a great gift. And so Katerina is coming on to talk about just the process and the magic of translating these books.
Well, we'll see. So I just want to start by saying I am not a translator. I actually
but
it's really important to know, like, translation is an art, and translating books is a very specific talent and capacity that some people have and that I definitely don't have. Maybe I'm so fascinated by it too. And I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about how I became so touched by the power of translation. And it actually goes kind of backwards, because I was part of writing the Being You, Changing the World book. And when Dane asked me to help him write that book, I think he texted me. I was sitting on a train or something, and I was like, but I'm not a native speaker. My first language is Swedish. How could I ever write a book in English? And it really took like this leap of faith to say, he said, well, you have this quality in your writing, because I really love writing, even though I don't translate a lot, but you have this quality of writing that is like fairy-like, that I would like to have in this book. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. So we wrote this book in English. And I think in one way, me writing in English, not having it as my first language, actually gave me a freedom to play with things that a native speaker wouldn't have, like less structure, basically, than in English. So I wasn't so keen on saying things specific, like as they should be said. I could kind of play around and dance with the ways things were expressed. So anyhow, this is going to lead into the translation part. So this book came out in English 2011, and a few years later, right there it is in English.
Very exciting.
And then, since you did that,
yes,
or something. So then, a few years later, the book came out in Swedish, and I did not translate the book, and we had a professional translator that translated the books. However, before it came out, I was asked to read it to make sure it followed. Since I had written it with Dane, I was like, make sure it follows the original and that the energy was there and everything. And so I sat down and I started to read this book, and I just cried. And I cried nearly all through the book, like not bawling, but pretty much all through the book. It touched me in such a different way than the English. So even though I'd written the English book, even though I know exactly what it said in there, when I heard it in the language that I had grown up in the language that was my, childhood, family, school, it entered into my being in a whole different way. And I was amazed by what happened when I actually was able to receive it in my native tongue. So I was like, it really opened up. It was like the book was totally new. It's like I was reading a different book. And then I'm lucky enough to speak German. So I actually also read this book in we have this book in 20 languages. So but here's the German version of Being You, Changing the World. And so I read it in that too. I didn't have the same reaction. German is not my native tongue. So I had a different, but it was a different book again. It was a different energy. And every word has an energy. Every language has an energy. If I started to speak English now, I would become a different energy than I am. If I start to speak Swedish now, I would become a different energy than when I'm speaking English. So it makes sense. And I realized that every time we translate a book, it's like we're opening up a new universe in that language, because we're taking that book that's in the English speaking energetic world, and we're bringing it into the Japanese world. And in that translation process, it's like it's newborn, because it gets to play with, you know, the all the cultures, all the languages, all the energies of that country, all the energies of that language, and what that language has been for hundreds and thousands of years. Suddenly the book meets that, and it becomes something new. It becomes something totally original in my point of view when it comes out in a different language. I get very excited talking about it.
I'm excited too. Katarina, I've been around these books for ever, and I didn't realize that this was going on because I only speak English. This is so exciting.
And then I was trying to see if I could have another example, because you actually I guess you need to be at least bilingual to have that particular experience. But I wanted to also look at, so the other side of that was, we also wrote a series of children's books that I think Dane is going to come on and talk about them later.
Yes.
And one of the first children's book we translated to Swedish, I forgot to bring it, but was the Baby Unicorn Manifesto. And an amazing translator, Annelie, who also works with Access, she translated this book into Swedish, and then she gave it to me and said, hey, you should probably check this since this is your book. and I read it, and I'm like, I had a lot of points of views about the Swedish. And I noticed how more structured we are in our own languages. Well, we have this like sense of another language. We kind of like, we can let it go. It can flow a little bit more. But when it was Swedish, I was like, oh, well, is this exactly like this? So I had to really look at how much more controlled I was in my own language when it came to that. And then I had been when I wrote it in English. So even kind of like the journey of exploring a different language, of expressing oneself in a different language, I realized how much more freedom there is when you become bilingual or trilingual, or we have people in Access that works for us that are like fivelingual, that you actually can move between these different energies, and that you can sometimes have more freedom in a language that isn't yours. And that's also one of the, if you are bilingual and you listen to this, I would really suggest reading our books, like any kind of book, Anne's that was just on, in your language and in English. Read it in both, because you'll receive a different thing from the English book. You'll receive a different energy, a different tone, a different frequency from the English book. So if you could read them both, it's like you get a double, receiving.
That is so neat. Wow, I've been studying Spanish for a long time, but I've never been immersed, but I can pretty much read and write in Spanish. So now I'm like, I want to get the Spanish book and start looking at this, and even teaching myself to read more of Spanish and learn from the books, because I want this experience. It sounds like it's just so powerful.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because one of the things that I've noticed when we release books in other languages is it's treated often by the country, the people, receiving the book as a gift. It's like the fact that we've taken the time, the energy, you know, to translate this whole book. Like it's an entity on its own. It has its own life. It has kind of like its own temperament, nearly a book. And then we've taken that, we've translated, we bring it to their country, and it's somehow, it's like they're receiving a gift. They're honored that it's been translated. And in that way, it's like they're receiving the author, I think, in their own voice in a different way than when you listen to a translation through a translator's voice. Like you know, if you listen to translators, a translator's voice that talks to you. And in a book, it's actually the author's voice that they can still hear. So if they read Being You, for example, in Spanish, they can hear Dane in Spanish, you know, in whatever way they do. We all perceive and read and have images in our heads in all different kinds of ways, like Anne was talking about. Like, so it may be different for different people, but whatever they're receiving is this kind of like a Spanish Dane that has come to them in the form of a tiny little book.
That's so cool. Honestly.
Then we have like a tiny Gary and a tiny Simone.
Think about it. Like, I'm just thinking about all the different languages now. I'm thinking about how different it, like the energy of someone speaking Portuguese is than somebody speaking Japanese. Like, and how that must relate, and the energy that must create, a little Japanese Dane and a little Portuguese Gary, and what that actually is you just get all of these different nuances, and the whole thing is the same but completely different.
And now I was trying to find, so then you have like the physical aspect of some languages. So this is Hebrew. I think it's Hebrew. I'm pretty sure it's Hebrew. But anyway, they read from the other way. Like they open, so the book opens here, right? Instead of opening on the other. So it's the same for Japanese, has a similar thing where the book, like you actually read the other way around. So if you look at that and suddenly you're receiving something that actually is organized according to how other things that you've received in life has been organized, then you also receive it and possibly allow it to seep through in a different way because it's coming towards you in that different way. So there's so many, and even though we try to keep the books the same, they always they look different, you know? Even though
and one is so much thicker than the other.
Yeah. The German one is it's very, you know, it looks very German and organized and beautiful. The Swedish one only came in hardcover. Like all the countries have their own, every single country have their own way of printing, even though they're getting the same kind of files from the beginning that we're working with. Every single time it turns out different. It has, the culture is like seeping into the pages of the book and the cover and the colors and the way they print. And if it's glossy, like all of that. And that's also when it's published by the same publishing company. And sometimes in these cases, we've published it by different publishing companies, and then it's even more apparent. But for me, that's like this, again, it's how the world, it's how we are that different. And it's just the beauty of it all is that they're so different, and that every single time a book comes out in a new language, there's a new universe.
So great. I'm so glad that you brought up the idea to talk about this today, because it's like, where else would we get to have this conversation? This is just it's just such a gift. And can you talk a little bit about how Access has come to be so international? You know, when Gary and Dane started Access Consciousness, they were, you know, both born and raised in America, but that has not been the energy of Access. It is so international, and it is translated into so many languages. Can you just talk about how that came to be?
Yeah, it is actually really beautiful. So they both were living in California at the time. And I think in the beginning of Access, most of the classes were in the US, in Australia, and of some reason in Italy. So there was a woman, or she's still alive? She's still, she still works with us, Cass Thomas, who lived in Italy. She's American, and she lived in Italy. And they started to go more and more to Italy, and she pulled more and more Italians in. And Italians are not that great in English, not all the time. So he wanted to start translating. In the very beginning of the classes, if somebody didn't understand English, there would be people kind of standing beside them whispering the translation in their ears. That would be the kind of translation we had in the beginning. So it got a little like noisy. And then we started to do a translation where she would sit in between Gary and Dane, and she would basically, they would say something, she would translate it, then the other one would say something. So like, I can't remember the word, like the translation, consecutive translation. Yeah. So, and we did for a long time, and slowly more and more languages came in, more and more people came in from different countries. And the way Gary and Dane runs the company, there's such an organic growth. There's so much growth from the Access bars, that is the very first class in Access Consciousness, which is a class that we have, I think, nearly 10,000 bars facilitators all over the world. So they grow Access in countries that Gary and Dane or Simone, Grace, Anthony, Kalpana may never have been to. Like it grows, and it has that organic growth. So more and more languages came and desired translation. So we started to do translation more and more in classes. In the beginning, the translators would like walk around in the classes and kind of talking to their little devices, and those devices would be connected to little headphones that people were wearing, and it got noisier and noisier because we had more and more translators, and the translators really enjoyed walking around, like feeling the energy in the room, kind of perceiving each other, I think too. Like it was kind of like Babel's Tower in the classes. There was so much like, but in all, you could hear like Turkish here and Japanese there. And then if you walked over there, there was Spanish. So after a while, this is the live part, we actually started to use translation booths that most of you, if you haven't been to a class, you'll have seen them in like big international meetings or international organizations like the UN. They will have translation booths that are in the back of the room where the translators sit, and then they send out to all these people that are wearing little headphones all over the room. And that's what we still do. And we sometimes have, I think, like 20 translation booths in some classes. There's a lot of languages live. And with that, the written translation also grows. You need manuals in all those languages, and people are starting to ask for books. They're starting to ask for the books that gets written in English to be translated. So in the beginning, we translated a few of them, of course, to Italian first, and then other languages started to come in. And we have a really big crew of translators that we work with, and a system that had over the years become amazing for translating books, proofreading books, having editors involved in the books. It's a big process to translate a book. It isn't just taking the book and then paper and translate it. It's a really involved, energetic, and also a lot of work in that process that goes into the process. So you translate, then you edit the book, then you proofread the book, then you check the edit, and then you all these different steps. And I would say in the beginning, some of the books that were done in the beginning maybe didn't have that quality check, or maybe we didn't ask that many questions. And over time, you learn to start asking, okay, so if I can't really find the translation of this particular topic or word or expression, then you back up and you start even like asking several people. And a lot of times we end up asking Gary or Dane, like, what do you get? Which of these words actually is congruent enough to work to translate? Sometimes, because of the way languages work, they're based on the culture, right? The words come from the cultures. Sometimes they don't even have words for what we have words for it in
Right.
English do not exist in some languages. So then you have to look at, okay, do we translate it at all? Do we keep the English word, or do we find something that's similar? And all of that are choices that again creates that new creation, of the new
Yeah.
book coming out in the
It's
world.
It is so amazing, like, to see, like, one of the things I've been coming up against is, how do you say trophy wife in different languages? Because that's a very specific, very
Mhm.
American-based term and concept. And, we're like, I don't know, what are some of the other examples you would have, Katerina, of, like, these very specific things that are very difficult to translate sometimes or take a lot of thought?
Well, I think trophy wife is a great example, actually, because I was just trying to think of the Swedish word for trophy wife, and I don't even know if there is one. And it depends on, I'm sure there is something similar, right? But I couldn't think of it on the top of my head. And it's
Yeah.
interesting in the way that that's one of your main if you're writing a book about it, that's like one of your main concepts. So then you have to really find it. I know that we talk about something called sexualness in Access, which is really hard to translate. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It has nothing to do with any of the things that comes up as associations
Oh.
to that word. And it's a word that Gary created. So it doesn't really exist. So then you have to look at, do we try to create a word like that in the language, or do we keep the word as it is? So it's
Oh.
so important not
Oh.
to get the word slightly off, not to get the word, to keep that energy, since every word is an energy, to actually find the word that is closest, or the sentence or the paragraph that's closest to the energy of what the book is actually conveying in that moment. So
Wow. So can I ask you, so let's say you are doing, a book into Japanese and you need to translate sexualness. So if you chose to keep sexualness as is, then would you provide like a written explanation, a more long-winded written explanation in the book about what sexualness is in Japanese, but then keep using that word over and over? How does that play
I,
out?
I think it differs between every book. So in
Okay.
many of these books, the word, if we use that word, like in the Being You book, when that comes up, the explanation is right there. You're talking about it, you talk about it, and then you go, and this is what it is. So then it wouldn't be a problem. And I think that for many, many times, you can also put like two words together to get kind of the sense of what this word would be. So you would look at it every time. It is very much being in the question
Yeah.
continuously. Like translation in general, it's a very, you think that languages have a lot of structures, of course. Like this is, the verb has to come here, and here's the adjective, and you need the preposition, and then you
Right.
need to put them together in a certain structure to create the language. And at the same time, when you translate energy, you have to be in the question all the time. And our live translators, basically the only way because they translate simultaneously, there's no way for them to fall back into the structure of how they should translate this word. They have to follow the energy. They basically have to kind of shut off their mind and just follow the energy of, so that they can translate simultaneously as the class happens, which is, for me, magic in motion.
Totally. I mean, I've heard people say, I tried to figure out what it was like to be somebody who's translating these live access consciousness classes. So I don't know, maybe it was even you who said this. So I kept I would say the whole class in my head, just repeating in my own in English, even though they were saying it in
Right.
English over again. And that was really difficult. So how does somebody change it into a different language? It is so amazing.
Well, and it probably wasn't me.
Okay, I don't know why I thought I
But
heard you
it's,
say
no, but that it's a really good practice. So
that.
I'm going to try that too. What
Mhm.
happens to many people, and including me, is that if you're bilingual or trilingual, your brain switches over to the language you hear. So when
Oh,
you speak English to me, my brain goes, oh, it's English. Now we're English. And then it speaks that. So for me, it's very tricky. I don't have the capacity of be with two languages at the same time. But the magic of translators is that they actually have that. They can be, I can swap between and back really quickly, but they have the capacity of being two languages at the same time. And I think that a lot of the really good written translators have that too. So they can kind of like dance in between the languages continuously. And I find it's this unacknowledged miracle that we have languages and that we can translate them so that all these different energies and ideas can meet each other and can actually be brought, over the ocean into a whole different world. And there becomes something that it would never be if it didn't land there, if it didn't get to meet that culture or those words or those people.
Yeah. And one of the things about access consciousness is it has spread from just being in California to in 182 different countries approximately. And I mean, that's more countries than most common things are in. Like somebody was saying Barbie is not Barbie is in like 70 countries. You know what I mean? We only have 192 countries. But how is access and the gift of consciousness in 182 countries? And it's like it's the conversation that we just had. It's the gift of translation, the gift of consciousness and energy, and people who are looking for a different possibility and reaching for it. And how did this even happen? But it's just like you say, it's the magic. It's just the magic of it all.
And it's also the empowerment of people. So it is one of the really amazing parts about Access as a company is that, I mean, the tagline is empowering people to know that they know. And this empowering people is also what allows Access to grow in that organic way, where we reach people in countries that we may not even have advanced facilitators in. So you're so correct. And can I just say, I'm very glad we beat Barbie. I think it bodes well for the future of the world that access consciousness is in more countries than Barbie. I think that's amazing and good.
I agree 100%. Oh, it's so funny. Oh, thank you so much for coming on, Katerina. This has been just a delight. I'm so grateful that we had the chance to bring this information to everyone,
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.